There are three of you sat there. Most of these interviews, when we have designers and it's just one, talk to me about how this works.
We actually work in a very traditional way. The only difference between us and most companies of our size is that there are three people standing at the fore when the credit comes. But with each of us, we've got skills, expertise, and strengths, weaknesses that everyone would need in a company of our size to succeed. And so, in fact, our roles are very traditional. The way that we normally break it down in the most simplistic way to put it is that I instigate, and so I will start the ball rolling and create the initial ideas. Then I'll hand over to Sid, who will then make those ideas three-dimensional and real, and then it will be handed over to Gazette, who controls how we're seen in the outside world. But it is a constant conversation between the three of us. One thing we don't do, though, is we do not design by committee, and we're not like the Waltons, and so we do disagree, and we do have differing opinions, but it's a conversation between us, but we each have our strengths and weaknesses, which we play to.
And also, we tend to look at it that we are employed by the brand, so we work towards working for Sibling. So that also makes it easier because, the three of us all have our own characters and our own ideas for the label. But in the end, if it doesn't work for the brand, then we'll drop an idea or we'll redo it or something like that. And that helps. I think it helps keeping the brand quite strong.
And it means our ego is contained within the brand.
Sure.
We don't have our personal egos don't ever come into battle, because the ego is Sibling's ego, and we work to encourage and nurture that.
It's interesting to me, Joe, what you're saying about sort of this idea of ego, because you've said in interviews before, sort of you didn't want to design under all your names. You wanted to.
That was a very definite initial, like one of the first decisions that we made after that initial decision to do something, is that the second decision after doing something was we didn't want it to be named after any of us.
Except for some people think it's Sidling.
Yeah.
When we first started, they were like, Sidling? It was
And
like,
you are my
no.
Sidlets, someone said to me last
Sidlets,
night.
exactly.
Which of course Sid encourages.
Yeah. So yeah.
But
exactly.
why Sibling? Talk to me about that name, because it's an incredibly striking name.
It was very straightforward, and it came very quickly, because we wanted it to sound inclusive and not excluding, and so we wanted it to feel like a bit of a gang.
I'm intrigued. I think it's probably again a question you get asked a lot, but which came first, this desire to work together as a three and to do something together, or was it a desire to do something to rejuvenate men's knitwear? Because they're kind of two very sort of core reasons behind Sibling.
When we first worked on Sibling, it was to also fill holes in our own wardrobes.
Sure.
So there was this idea that we were just doing it for ourselves. I mean, it was a very sort of selfish reason for doing something, but we didn't do it. We launched out of Fashion Week.
It was actively not a commercial enterprise that we ventured into initially.
Which is always a good way to start a business. Like all the samples were based on Joe. So they weren't, even our samples weren't sample size. We even went, completely to that
huge.
way. They were huge.
Well, I'm huge. But it was that thing that I wasn't going to create anything that I couldn't wear, and I can't fit into sample sizes, so I became the sample size. Sid can fit into sample sizes, and so
It's like a dress.
So I won. I was the new sample size.
You always win.
I love you say you always win. I'm interested because you guys are such a joy to how you communicate with each other, but do you fight a lot?
No, we disagree a lot, but we never fight. It's a joy to work with each other because we absolutely have no doubt, we share absolutely the same goals. And it's rare in any work environment that you have that you may have people that you get on with or not, but people shift and move in careers, and because your goal is is at least 50% selfish wherever you're working, because you're working on your own career, and you're working on where you're going to move to next, or where you're going to move to next in the company. But of course, that we've got the joy of that we know 100% that we're all focused on the identical goal. It's hard work, and it's tiring, and you get emotional, and there are times when you just can't cope anymore. But with us three, there's no point when systems go down, because if two are on the floor crying, there's always one left standing that can take the helm at that point and move forward. So we are never standing still, and God forbid we're never stepping back.
And it's not just your setup that's different, but also I feel like your work has a very sort of specific, quite a particular feel to it.
It's very easy for people to misread our work, because our work is very positive, and it can look very light on the surface, and that's absolutely on purpose. We absolutely want it to be enthusiastic and positive and all those things, but it doesn't mean that the work is any less cerebral, and that the concepts are any less rounded than any of your dark, deep searching. In fact, I consider our work to be that further developed from that, because we try not to ram our concept down people's throats, because the concept isn't for other people. The concept is for us to produce our work, and so I think people can perhaps have a perception that our work is shallower than it is, because we are very willing for it to look light-hearted. Because we want the outlook to be positive and sparkly and fun, but the investigation is as deep as if it was about suicides of nuns. That it doesn't have to be bleak to be deep.
Why is it so important to you, though, that it does feel so optimistic?
Because we
life's tough enough. Bloody hell! And I think it's something to do with our maturity as well. Because we're a bit older than most people in the companies at our level. And I too was the bleakest, darkest, most miserable goth of a teenager. So it's not that we haven't been through that. It's just that we're not there. We're not there now. And that is so vital to what we do. It's that I can't understand why anyone wouldn't want to work like that. But 10 years ago, I wouldn't have worked like that. I'd have been deep dolly, and if it wasn't about slaughtering of
innocence,
then it wouldn't have been. Or if it wasn't offending somebody, if it wasn't shocking somebody, they wouldn't have been doing their job. But we take those passions, and those same passions, and we just steer them in a different direction. We're as passionate and as determined to give a message across, but that message is one of positivity and fun and apparent light.
Anyone that knows us knows that there is a very, very serious business behind what we do, and we are definitely not doing this for the fun of it. It's about building a brand, a very, very we hope a significant brand that's going to make a real difference and build a future.
Not actually fun being a designer, especially when you're starting a new brand. It's incredibly tough, isn't it? Talk to me a bit about that, because I think people who watch these interviews think that being a designer is glamorous and exciting, but it's very time consuming. It costs a lot of money. There are few rewards at the start, aren't there? It's
very, very hard work. I mean, even I think as you carry on, because as the business grows, and as what we're finding now, actually as the business grows, the workload becomes more, and you find yourselves under more and more pressure. So actually, those pressures that you have in the beginning, when you're really wanting to do something and make a difference within this industry, are hard enough. But actually, as success happens, then it becomes more increased. Like we were saying, you've really got to love it. It's not easy, and we never feel like we have to fight with people who think that fashion is frivolous, and that it's so glamorous, and you go to parties and you drink champagne and you wear nice clothes and all that sort of thing. I mean,
because we did last night.
Every now and again you do, which is fabulous, but. I don't know. It's
but it's also hard. Not digging ditches in the middle of winter.
Yeah,
exactly. Sid and I from very working class backgrounds, and the thing is that give me my job every day over working for the whole of your life in a crappy factory that do monotonous, unrelenting work that no one gives you any credit for.
Yeah.
You're bringing pittance home to raise a family. Give me being a fashion designer every day. It's fucking hard work, but it's not digging ditches in the middle of winter.
Yeah.
Let's not forget that.
Exactly.
Let's talk more about your backgrounds, because we talked a lot about the present, and I want to know where, because you're all from sort of incredibly interesting backgrounds, and from reading interviews before, it seems like for a lot of you, so your first interaction or excitement with fashion came from something that your parents were wearing or doing. Just tell me, all of you, when you first became excited by clothing or style.
I came from a shockingly normal background. It was I lived in almost geographically the centre of England, Leicester, in a very suburban area where everyone's parents around did the same jobs as my parents. Everyone's mum worked in hosiery, everyone's dad worked in engineering. So I didn't come from it was just absolutely wondrously average, my upbringing, for all its good and its bad. But they were both peacocks. There were my mother used to go to work in a factory looking like Diana Dawes, and my dad used to come home from the factory and get dressed up to go out each night looking wondrous. Still to this day, is all cravatted up and everything. Very camp for a butch man, for a rugby player. But yeah, that's where I got my taste.
Yeah, mine's actually pretty similar. I think Joe and I both share very flamboyant parents.
I've in fact inherited some of your dad's look.
Exactly. I mean, my parents, I come from a different background, and my sort of up until about the age of 8, I actually grew up in London. But both my parents were very much around musicians and actors and models and fashion. I mean, my mum was dressing me in Bieber when I was tiny. So there was a lot, to do about, fashion and clothing, but buying well. And then my father was just a complete clothes freak. Would buy Claude Montana. I mean, this was in the 80s. So thought nothing of, wide leg leather trousers and a matching blouson. But it always meant I could see where my father was. I could see him striding down Knightsbridge. There he would be in this silk habitai full length trench coat. But it's what it installed in me was just a real love of really well made clothing. And then also I was this height from about the age of 13, 14. So my mum would make me a lot of clothes because I just couldn't fit into stuff from Miss Selfridge. I just wasn't, normal height and it was a total beanpole as well.
Say it to your 10.
I'm just trying to think where on earth it came from. I had...
Yours came from craft.
Yeah, I grew up in what was at the time the highest unemployment area of Britain, in South Yorkshire, and it was a pretty grim place. And I used to fill my time. It's a bit embarrassing.
These are my favourite stories.
Knitting and painting stones.
My grandma taught me to knit, as did my mum, and crochet from a really young age. I used to paint pebbles. We had a church, a very old church in the village I grew up in, which was in the Doomsday Book, and I used to paint pictures of it in watercolours and sell them in the local gift shop. A little sort of entrepreneurial, anything and everything. I used to make myself t-shirts, knit stuff. It was never fashion specific, I don't think, and I don't. My fashion
it definitely
opinion
most positively was not.
was really random. I did a lot of crafty stuff for quite a few years. Some of it really very special, looking back. And then when I got to 18, I did a foundation course at Doncaster, which is where I met Alison McClellan, who was on the same course, and lots of creative people. Obviously, then I got introduced properly to textiles and fashion, and actually I studied fashion. Studied textiles before I studied fashion, which is again going back to that real craft sort of rooting, if you like.
You guys, you said in interviews before, you had a slightly different sort of introduction to the working world of fashion. It was from working with individuals. You worked with some amazing brands. Talk to me a bit about about that period where you started, you know, actually like getting jobs with fashion people?
And I was working on 5 shows a season back then with like, you know, huge names out of that little...
Producing pieces that are now in some of the greatest collections in museums.
Yeah, it's weird, yeah.
Sid's created some of the most iconic knitwear of the last 15 years.
Exactly.
So some of the pieces that have absolutely been crucial crux moments in fashion and knitwear, that Sid has created many of those single-handedly.
I think, well, for me it wasn't a natural process. Well, I went to college. I did a very traditional route. I went to college and studied textiles, and then I applied for the Royal College and somehow got in, which I still sort of couldn't believe that it was happening. A sort of boy from Yorkshire, and, you know, pinching myself on the bus going past the Albert Hall in London, which was so far into London. And you know,
Billy Elliot.
From that, I love Billy Elliot.
Yeah.
And then from that, I thought, still I think in my very sort of working class background mentality, you know, I would study for this long, and I was absolutely blessed to be able to get that sort of education at that level, which was the highest in my mind that it possibly could be, to study what I wanted to do. And then I would go and I would get a job, and I would work for someone else, which I tried to do. And after I graduated, I went and had lots of interviews in Italy and in France and all over, and nothing happened at all. So I sort of continued knitting, and then was sort of blessed enough to be introduced to a couple of designers then at the time, through contacts that I had through the Royal College, which is then when I met Cosette, and I've never actually got that job.
And you must all be incredibly proud of knitwear as a category, because now it's something
It's everywhere.
Yeah.
It's everywhere.
It's
It's
huge.
everywhere.
It's
And
absolutely
also,
Proud and a bit annoyed.
When I first graduated from the Royal College, I mean, I remember sort of going through a hit list of companies that I wanted to work for, and it was about 10 companies that actually had a knitwear design and position, and then quite a lot of the companies that I was targeting, you know, they didn't have a specific knitwear department. Knitwear was like, you know, oh, let's do some bags, you know, let's do some jumpers, let's do some scarves, kind of thing. It wasn't a part of the core collection for many companies.
Unless
And
you were
obviously
Missoni, and that was
now,
kind of
yeah,
it.
apart from Missoni.
And do you think that it wasn't something that was also seen as having a sort of a fashion relevance? It wasn't-
Absolutely.
yeah.
It was about ranging. It
Yeah.
was about carrying colour. It was about
Accessorising.
Yes.
To
And-
accessorising
oh,
range.
it's winter, so let's do a knitted
Yeah.
t-shirt, and that's kind of how it was for a very long time.
So I mean, it's quite fabulous now to you know, knitwear is so huge and so varied as well. You know, the boundaries have just been exploded, I think.
The benefit of it exploding is that factories that we work with are much more willing to experiment. You know, whereas, you know, it could be, at the beginning it could be quite tricky to get them to do anything that was not a grey V-neck.
Do you think it's changed the way that, it's interesting what you were saying, Cosette, about how young designers, what they aspire to do now when they're graduating, and going back to what you were saying, Sid, about this idea that, you know, of working with your hands and of doing something that's very craft focused, because I think a criticism that's often levied at London designers, that it's very sort of perhaps poorly finished, it's very much about the concept, it's very much about the surface, and it's not about the craft, and that seems completely removed from what you're doing. And
I think that's a historical criticism.
Yeah.
You know, when you've got people like Simone Rocha coming through, her work is exquisite, and it's equally embedded in craft and finish. So I think that criticism was very fair. I think actually a number of years ago, when you look back historically at what was thrown down London Fashion Week catwalk, it's cringeworthy. But there were huge names that at the time that were throwing down awful, really badly worked stuff. But now I think that that tag is unfair. There's a level of professionalism and pride in work and finish that's going on now.
But that's because of designers like you. I think that do you not feel a sense of pride?
Yeah.
that
Yes,
people-
absolutely.
Yeah.
And also I think it's, you know, that even from like, you know, the other levels like the BFC and the New Gen panel and things like that, I think they've also changed their mindset. It was, for me personally, it felt very much like when people were chosen to do catwalk or to do presentation, it was almost that you were doing an open portfolio of some nonsense that you would then be taken on board by a big Italian company like, you know, the Diesels or the what have you, because they wanted something London. They wanted a London vibe. And the London vibe tended to be very much about being straight out of college and having fun and, you know, and enjoying yourself. It wasn't really about, to my mind, about building a brand or building, you know, a business. But now things have definitely shifted, and especially for menswear.
Yes.
I mean, we were very vocal about menswear and how if it was going to be taken seriously, it needed to have its own identification and its own like scheduling. We couldn't just tag it on the end of the women's wear anymore. And you know, LCM has been like a huge success for our business. You know, just having, not only just doing catwalk and things like that, but just being able to say, okay, it's this amount of days and the buyers come, and you know, we're up there with Paris and Milan, and you know, it's been brilliant, really brilliant.
And I think that was a part of the same movement where everyone took as seriously as businesses rather than just, because what happened before is that even within our own industry within the UK, we were treated like our only job was to inspire high street. That is not my fucking job. That's their job. They don't pay me to do that. And that really angers me. That is nothing to do with my career at all. When they want to pay me, I'll give them work. If they steal it, they can go fuck themselves. It's nothing to do with me. And even our own media and people behind the industry were treating us like that was our only job, was to create this huge firework display of inspiration for people to grab and capitalise on. Well, fuck off. That's my idea. I want to make money off it.